chandelier overhead probably cost more than my first truck. I sat stiffly at the long mahogany table, surrounded by men in tailored suits who traded stock tips like baseball cards. My tie itched, the collar felt too tight, and I'd already lost count of how many times someone had mentioned Harvard. My name is Nate Walker. I'm a 3-4-year-old former Marine sergeant from Dayton, Ohio, and I now run Green Line Veterans Landscapes, a small business that hires vets to restore overgrown lawns and neglected yards. Not exactly cocktail party fodder in the heart of Washington, D.C. But here I was, seated between a congressman and a hedge fund manager, trying not to fidget while my wife smiled graciously beside me. Her father, Richard Sterling, had just finished describing my job to the table in the tone one might use for a particularly loyal pet. He chuckled as he said, "Nate turns grass into art. Isn't that right, son?" I smiled, slow and measured, and replied, "Just doing my part to keep America looking sharp, sir." The laughter around the table was polite, but I could feel the undercurrent. I didn't belong here. It wasn't shame I felt, just awareness. These people wore their privilege like a second skin. I wore mine in calluses and scars, invisible to the eye but stitched deep into who I am. I didn't grow up around fine china and tax shelters. I grew up fixing broken fences, learning to fight with my fists, and later, learning to fight for my country. Now I fight to give other veterans a shot at a life beyond uniforms and war stories. That's what they didn't get, that this wasn't just a landscaping business. It was a second chance for me, for the guys who work with me. I might have been the only one at that table with dirt under his nails, but I held my head high, because dignity doesn't need validation, and purpose doesn't require applause. After I left the Marines, I thought the hardest part was over. I'd survived Afghanistan. I'd led men through firefights and brought most of them home. But nothing prepared me for how invisible I'd feel once I got back. People thanked me for my service in passing, but no one really wanted to know what I'd seen. Job interviews were a blur of polite nods and closed doors. I had discipline, grit, and leadership. Apparently, that didn't matter much when you didn't have a college degree or a LinkedIn profile with the right buzzwords. I started Green Line with a beat-up trailer and a rusted mower I bought at an estate sale. My first clients were skeptical. One lady asked if I was just doing this until I found something real. I smiled and said this was real enough for me, even as I drove home with $20 in my pocket and gas light on. Brooke was there in those early days. Quietly, always. She believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. But loving someone and standing up for them aren't always the same thing, especially when your father is Richard Sterling. He never said it outright, but his disapproval hung in the air every time we visited. He'd pour wine like it was some kind of performance and talk about market trends as if I were a kid who'd wandered in from the wrong room. Brooke never contradicted him, not once. But later, when we were alone, she'd run a hand down my back and whisper, "I'm proud of you." I knew she meant it, but I also knew she'd never say it in front of him. There were nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd made a mistake. Not about marrying her, about thinking I could ever fit into her world. I was the landscaping guy with combat boots in the foyer and dirt under my nails. He was the man with a wine cellar, a yacht, and a sneer that said everything he thought of me without a word. Even in our own home, I sometimes felt like a guest. Brooke decorated with an elegance I didn't quite understand. I appreciated it, but there were no traces of who I was on the walls. Just clean white frames and magazine-style perfection. My medals sat in a box in the closet. My old uniform in a garment bag I hadn't opened in years. Still, I kept pushing. For every no I heard, I knocked on 3 more doors. I hired other vets because I knew how it felt to be dismissed, to have your worth questioned in silence. They became my people. My new unit. We didn't need titles or pedigree. We just needed purpose. But sometimes, late at night, I'd still wish Brooke would just once say it out loud. To her father, to the world, that I belonged, that what I built mattered, that I mattered. It came in a plain envelope with no return address. The handwriting was precise, controlled, the kind that belonged to someone used to giving orders. I nearly threw it out, thinking it was just another ad, but something about it stopped me. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a name that felt like a punch to the chest. General Richard Lane, my biological father. The man I was told had died before I was old enough to remember him, except he hadn't. He was alive, and he wanted to meet. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, just staring at the letter. The words were polite, formal even. I understand this may come as a shock. I would like the chance to explain. My hands shook as I folded it back up, but my mind raced with questions I didn't know how to ask. I called Uncle Pete. He raised me after Mom died. He taught me how to drive, how to shave, how to stand up for myself. I asked him straight, "Did you know?" There was a long pause before he spoke. "Yeah, Nate, I knew. I kept it from you because I didn't think he deserved to be called your father." I could hear the weight in his voice. He'd carried this secret for decades. Said Lane walked away from my mom when she got pregnant. Said he was career first, family later. Said Mom never wanted me to know that kind of man. I felt like the floor had cracked under me. Everything I thought I knew had a fault line running through it. I wasn't mad at Pete. Not really. He did what he thought was right, but I couldn't ignore the ache in my chest. That name, Lane. It wasn't just a name anymore. It was part of me. Whether I liked it or not. I didn't sleep that night. Just kept going over the letter in my head. What did he want from me? Regret? Redemption? Or maybe he just wanted to clear his conscience before it was too late. I didn't know, but I knew I had to find out. The next morning, I called the number at the bottom of the letter. A woman answered. His assistant. She said he was expecting my call. Her voice was gentle, almost too gentle, like she was afraid I'd hang up. I didn't. I said I'd meet him. I needed answers. I needed to look him in the eye and see for myself. Because sometimes it's not the truth that hurts, it's the silence. And I'd lived with enough silence to know I didn't want to carry it any longer. We didn't rush it. Our first meeting was brief, formal, in a private room at a small DC restaurant where no one would notice us. Lane wore a suit crisp enough to cut glass and greeted me with a nod, not a hug. He didn't apologize. Just said he hadn't been the man my mother needed him to be. Said he wouldn't make excuses. I appreciated that more than an apology. At least he wasn't pretending to be something he wasn't. We started meeting once a month. Always somewhere quiet, no cameras, no headlines. Just two men trying to figure out what this strange late-in-life connection meant. He asked about Green Line, about the guys I'd hired, about the struggles. I told him everything. Not because I trusted him yet, but because I needed to say it out loud to someone who understood structure, chain of command, and starting from the dirt up. He listened, really listened. Not with sympathy, but with interest. He told me about procurement systems, how base maintenance contracts were awarded, how veteran-owned businesses could apply. Never gave me a handout. Just information, tools, direction. He made a few introductions, quiet ones. No pomp, no name dropping. A colonel here, a civilian officer there. Still, it took years. I put together the bids, wrote the proposals, sat through long meetings where I felt like an outsider again. But I kept showing up. Slowly, Green Line grew. We went from patching lawns in the suburbs to handling full-scale landscaping contracts for 2 regional bases. Lane never asked for credit, never showed up at a ribbon cutting. But I knew who had left the door unlocked for me. He respected what I built, and in return, I respected the boundaries he set. We never called each other father and son. We didn't need to. We showed up. That was enough. He taught me how power moves quietly, how the right person saying your name in the right room can change everything. But he also made it clear, your work gets you in the room. I just make sure the light's on when you knock. Over time, trust settled in. Not the kind born from old memories or childhood warmth. The kind built on accountability. He didn't owe me love, he gave me respect, and that, after everything, mattered more than I expected. Green Line wasn't some gift. I earned every inch of it. But without him, I wouldn't have known which inch to fight for first. Success didn't show up with a ribbon or a headline. It came in the form of 5 a.m. starts, mountains of paperwork, and years of proving myself to people who didn't expect much. I didn't blame them. Green Line Veterans Landscapes sounded like a weekend hobby to most, not a serious contender for federal contracts. But I built it anyway, 1 yard at a time. I studied everything I could about government procurement, got certified as a service-disabled veteran-owned small business, hired other vets who knew the meaning of follow-through. We didn't talk a big game, we delivered results. It took years to even get noticed. Lane gave me guidance, but never shortcuts. His advice came with expectations. If I didn't follow through, he stopped talking. That kind of pressure didn't scare me. I'd led men through worse. What mattered was that someone finally saw I was capable. The moment everything changed came almost by accident. A new federal initiative rolled out to upgrade infrastructure and environmental maintenance at military installations. Most eyes went straight to tech. Smart weapons, drones, data systems. But buried in that initiative was a cluster of base support contracts. Landscaping, erosion control, stormwater systems. Admiral Beckman, my father-in-law, scoffed when he heard I was applying. He didn't say it to my face, but I heard the way he joked about yard work during family dinners. In his mind, defense meant warships and strategy rooms, not soil pH or retaining walls. He lobbied hard for his preferred firms, big names, old boys, companies with glossy brochures and inflated budgets. He never once considered mine. Not because we weren't qualified, but because we weren't visible to him. People like me weren't supposed to win. But I knew that contract like it was written for us. My team had already handled similar scopes at smaller installations. We had data, testimonials, we'd done the work. I submitted a proposal so tight they couldn't find a reason to say no. 3 months later, I got the call. Green Line had won. Not just a small piece. The whole contract. Multi-year, multi-state, long-term base improvement work. It was the biggest deal we'd ever landed. Beckman didn't say a word for weeks, but I saw his face at the next dinner. The quiet shock, the forced smile, he knew, and for once, he had nothing to say. It wasn't about beating him, it was about being seen, about proving that this work mattered, that our discipline, our precision, our grit deserved the same respect as any defense contractor with a bigger budget and a fancier pitch. I didn't need a handout, I needed a chance. A fair fight, and when I got it, I showed up prepared. Not just because of who mentored me, because of who I chose to be. Green Line didn't just grow that year. We became a name, a presence, a team that delivered excellence, not because we were trying to prove something, but because that was our standard. My name didn't open the door, my work did, and that made all the difference. The ballroom shimmered with brass and crystal. Generals, senators, and CEOs, the kind of crowd where medals clink and egos stretch wide. I stood near the edge of it, dressed sharp, but still feeling like a man who'd wandered into someone else's party. Brooke was radiant beside me, but I could feel the tension in her grip. Her father, Richard Sterling, was across the room, holding court as always. A retired admiral who still saw the world as a chain of command he ruled from the top. He spotted me, and I knew what was coming before he even opened his mouth. He made his way over, glass in hand, smile too tight to be friendly. In front of a small circle of officers and civilians, he gave me that look. The one he reserved for people he thought didn't quite measure up. Then he said it, casual as ever. Some men command fleets, some mow lawns. The chuckles were low and easy, not cruel, just dismissive, the way people laugh when they think they're in on something obvious. I felt heat rise in my chest, not from embarrassment, but from years of biting my tongue, of letting moments like this slide to keep the peace. Not tonight. I stepped forward, cleared my throat, and held his gaze. My voice was low but clear, cutting through the small noise. Admiral Sterling, I said. My name is Nate Walker. I'm the founder and CEO of Greenline Veterans Landscapes. We just secured the Department of Defense base restoration contract for the Eastern region. The words hit the floor like a dropped weight. The small circle grew quiet. Eyes shifted from me to him, back again. His face didn't change, but I saw the crack behind the eyes. He hadn't seen it coming. He never did. Then came the sound that changed everything. A chair scraped. General Lane stood up from his table across the room, his chest full of medals, his presence like a loaded weapon. He walked over, calm and deliberate, and placed a hand on my shoulder. And that's my son. The silence wasn't just quiet, it was reverent. Richard Sterling's mouth tightened, but he said nothing. There was no counter to this moment. Brooke didn't just squeeze my hand. She released my arm, stepped fully to my side, and looked directly at her father with a resolute gaze. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the silence. We are all very proud of Nate, father. I didn't gloat, didn't smirk, just nodded once, then stepped back. It wasn't about humiliating him. It was about standing my ground, about reclaiming every inch of space I'd once shrunk myself to fit into. The rest of the night moved around me like slow waves. People approached, shook my hand, asked about the contract, the mission, the vets we hired. Lane stayed close, never saying much, but his presence was its own kind of announcement. That line, "That's my son," echoed louder than any speech could have. Years of work, years of silence, years of being overlooked. It all landed in that moment. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was proving myself to anyone. I just felt like I belonged.